Hello, welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. How are you doing today?
Oh, wait,
I hope that you guys are still going to be doing the drawing of Mara.
Oh yeah, drawing of Mara.
And we are going to be doing the joke of the day with Daniel. Then we are going to be reading the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis with Kim. Then we are going to be doing Mara. I'll give you another glimpse. No looking back into this video. That's cheap.
Yeah, because
Joke of the day time, Dad.
now it's time for joke of the day. Now, what did the lettuce say to the celery?
I don't know what.
Quit stalking me, brah!
I don't.
so that was the joke of the day. Did y'all hear it? What did the lettuce say to the celery? Quit stalking me. That's pretty funny. Hi, Becca. We're so glad to see you. So yesterday we had some technical difficulties, and I wound up having to restart my computer, which tends to take a little while. So instead of making everybody wait for my computer to reload up from nothing, I just decided to cancel. But I was in the middle of Galatians 4, so I'm going to start that over again. And I haven't actually had a chance to delete yesterday's video, but I will be doing that. So this is Galatians. Actually, I have it right here. See, I can just keep, or I can use my ribbon. Galatians chapter 4. All right. Are we ready, boys? Are y'all settled? All right. Oh. I don't have the link set up ready to give to you, but if you want it, then look it up, Galatians 4 in Bible Hub. All right. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. Okay, see, this is what I was talking about. You guys scurrying around while I'm reading the Bible.
Okay.
Can y'all please settle down?
I'm trying to help Daniel.
I think the problem is that they played on the Switch too late today. I was trying to give them a little extra time, but because they got started late. All right. I wish that I could pause the live stream. Okay, yeah. The boys are not following instructions. They're both in Daniel's room.
You don't need to help him pack. You need to have your pajamas on and be in bed. When the live stream starts, we have to have our pajamas on. We have to be settled in bed. Okay? Okay. So this is your last chance.
Okay, let's try this again. Take 2, Galatians 4. I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything, but he is under the guardians and managers until the date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn your back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that, if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? They make much of you, but for no good purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. It is always good to be made much of for a good purpose, and not only when I am present with you. My little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I wish I could be present with you now and change my tone, for I am perplexed about you. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. Now this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. She is Hagar. Now, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. She corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother, for it is written, Rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of promise. But just as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so also it is now. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the slave and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman. That's the end of Galatians chapter 4. Hope you're enjoying Galatians. It's a great Bible study. So we've got two more chapters in Galatians, and then we'll keep going on to the electric part of the General Electric Power Company. That is Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and I like to say General Electric Power Company. That's a good way to remember those four books in that order. So I hope that the Word of God is meaningful in your life. And with that, we're going to head on over to the synopsis with Kimberly. She likes to have a dramatic entrance. Here she comes. All right, and JJ can get in his room, just like he's been told to already twice.
So in the last chapter, okay. In the last chapter, I got proved right. Mara did become a double agent, and she overheard a conversation
and basically she found out that the guy who was on the boat with her is actually the king's agent. So she's become a double agent for the king and an agent for the queen. So, yay? Yeah. What Mara's doing is she's giving information to the king, while she's also giving information about the king to somebody else. A bit confusing, I know, right? And that's about it.
All right, JJ. No, it's fine. JJ, I'm going to wait for JJ to get in his bed. Because this isn't so cool. Do, 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 do. Oh, JJ wants kitchen chores for a week. Yay. All right. JJ is still not in his bed. But he's in his room, so that's better. All right, chapter 6, Frightened Princess. I don't think that I actually told you what the first word was. Does anybody remember what the first word was? I don't think I did. All right. First word is sanguine. Who, if you remember who that is, that was the person that she was supposed to meet in Abydos who was going to make her look like somebody that the princess would speak to so that she could interpret for her. All right. So, chapter 6, Frightened Princess. Sanguine proved to be a squat, middle-aged man with a stupid face and eyes that seemed half asleep. He barely looked at Mara when she showed him the scarab and asked for instructions. Interpreter, I remember now. You're to find the Inn of the Lotus. It's close by, just yonder where you see the donkey turning into the alley. They've got their orders there. Mention my name. Mara started in the direction he indicated, glancing about her curiously. The wharfs of Abydos were not so different from those at Memphis, though the traffic had unfamiliar character. There was less merchandising here, fewer foreign vessels. Instead, there were funeral barges. She counted 8 in the harbor this moment. Abydos was the most ancient and sacred of all cities. The god Osiris himself was thought to be buried here, and all who could afford it arranged for their funeral processions to make pilgrimage from their own cities to this gate of the underworld before the final ceremonies of entombment. The Inn of the Lotus was easy to locate since it had a carved wooden flower swinging over its doorway. Mara entered, identified herself to the vacant-faced woman in charge, and was directed up an outside staircase. In the room above, a coal-black slave girl awaited her. Mara discovered almost immediately that she was deaf and dumb. Thoughtfully, she followed the girl into an adjoining bath chamber where great jars of water stood about the walls and the stone floor sloped to a center drain. The queen's man had made very sure of secrecy in this process of transforming her from a ragged slave into a person above suspicion. The woman downstairs was vague and stupid. This one was deaf and dumb, and Sanguine himself incurious. All the better for me, reflected Mara, remembering the menace in Sheftu's voice that morning when he had warned her again against trickery. The silver beetle was to loiter upriver until noonday, when the barge of the princess should overtake it. After seeing for themselves that Mara was safely on board, Sheftu and Nakonk would proceed to Thebes, and she would be free to carry out her own plans. She frowned. It gave her little pleasure to think about those plans. She turned her attention instead to the enjoyable ministrations of the black slave girl. The jars of water were poured over her, her hair was cleansed and trimmed, and her body rubbed with scented unguents until it glowed. Then, leading her back into the first room, the slave pointed to a little carved chest that stood in one corner. Mara opened its lid, and the last of her uneasy humor vanished. There were piles of snowy linen, leather sandals. She had never owned sandals in her life, even the common sort woven of palm fiber. There were a few pieces of jewelry, colored sashes, a warm white woolen cloak deeply fringed. There was a whole wardrobe in that chest, even to the pots and vials containing scents and cosmetics. It was not too lavish. It was scaled perfectly to the needs of a priest's daughter, the role Mara was to play. But to her it was unimaginable luxury. And as she shook the garments out one by one and looked at them, she felt again the fierce determination that nothing, nobody must stand in the way of her possessing such things always: freedom and gold and a life worth living, gardens with lotus blooming in the fish pool, roast duck and honey on the table, rows and rows of papyrus scrolls on the shelves in a beautiful room. So she dreamed, as the black girl dressed her in an ankle-length sheath of white linen, secured the white straps over her bare brown shoulders, and wound a cinnamon-colored sash twice about her waist, looping it in front so that the ends fell luxuriously to her sandals. Her hair was combed to glossy smoothness, scented and delicately oiled. Her eyelids were properly painted, with brows and lash lines elongated almost to her temples. There were gold bands for arms and ankles too, and a broad collar formed of cylindrical beads enameled the same deep, radiant blue as her eyes. She put away the little copper mirror at last with a sigh of content. It had been a long time since she had enjoyed even the near necessity of eye paint, which all Egyptians, men and women, considered essential to a decent appearance, and the rest was elegance undreamt of. The sandals did pinch a little, of course, when where a strap passed up between her toes, and the high curling tips would trip her if she didn't watch out. She was not accustomed to such grandeur. Never mind, she would grow accustomed to it. Only a gutter snipe went barefoot, followed by the slave, who padded silently behind her, carrying the chest. She returned to the wharf. Sanquen was now sitting on a folding stool on the deck of the prince's barge, staring apathetically at the cooks moving about on the attendant kitchen boat, which was moored nearby. Mara glanced up, shading her eyes. "Let down a ladder, please." He turned toward her, then leaned over the gunwale, his sleepiness gone. "You're the interpreter?" he asked uncertainly. "Yes." "The same one?" "Of course. I identified myself not half an hour since." "Aye, aye." His thick lips curled in a smirk. "But you look different now." "Indeed?" Mara gave him a perfunctory smile, careful neither to offend nor encourage him. She did not wish him to remember her longer than was strictly necessary. "Will you let down the ladder?" she repeated. He hastened to obey. When she stood beside him on the deck, her head held high, her eyes cool, he stopped gaping and became more respectful. "The princess and her train will return soon. You're to wait in there. I'll stow your chest." "Very well." As the slave woman walked across the wharf and out of her life as silently as she had come into it, Mara made her way to a pillared pavilion which occupied most of the deck space of the barge. There was space on each side for 12 oarsmen, but there was neither mast nor sail, and the captain's cabin had been removed in order to enlarge the quarters occupied by Anani and her women. Mara pushed aside one of the hanging carpets that formed the pavilion's walls and stepped in. The first thing she did was to kick off the unaccustomed sandals. Then, comfortably barefoot, she began to look about her. Dazzled by the sunlight outside, she could not at first distinguish one object from another in the shadowed interior. But as her eyes grew accustomed to the gloom, she began to make out couches and low tables, clothing boxes, and all the feminine hodgepodge of trinkets, mirrors, jewelry, and scents necessary to an entourage of a dozen women. The better she could see all this, the more astonished she became. She stepped quietly about the place, examining with curiosity and not a little revulsion the strange possessions of these barbarians. How different they were from anything Egyptian! The jewelry was crude and tasteless, the boxes uncarved, and the scattered clothing so vulgar in its gaudy colors that Mara's civilized Egyptian nose wrinkled disdainfully. All clothing should be white. In Egypt, even a slave knew that much, except for the furniture which, like the barge, had been built in Thebes. There was nothing in the pavilion which looked as if it might have any connection with a high-born princess. Princess, scoffed Mara inwardly. Probably some shepherd's daughter whose father bullied a few neighbors into calling him a king. Turning her back on the untidy room, she stretched full length on one of the couches and fell to wondering what life might be like in Pharaoh's palace. She had not long to wait before the cries of a runner, "Abrek, Abrek! Take care, take heart to thyself!" warned her that the trains of the princes were approaching. Hastily groping for her sandals, Mara listened as the hubbub reached the water's edge. Sanquen barked an order, evidently for the bearers to set down the litters and allow the women to emerge, for in a moment the air was filled with the sibilant mumble of Babylonian. As the women filed on board, it sounded as if 100 great bumblebees had been loosed on the deck. Mara rose and, walking to the carpet wall of the pavilion, oh, that's a comma, okay, and pushed a hanging aside and stepped out. She found herself face to face with the Canaanite princess. At first glimpse, Mara could not help smiling. Anani was overfed and dumpy, with untidy brown curls clinging damply to her forehead and escaping here and there from the long shawl she wore over her head. Half smothered and sweating in her bulky woolen draperies, which swathed her from head to toe and were striped and embroidered all over in garish colors, she looked every inch the gawky barbarian. But her eyes moved Mara to sudden pity. They were enormous, timid, frightened, dark eyes, and they stared at the Egyptian girl as they must have stared at countless strange faces and customs that had come up to bewilder her in this foreign land. "Who are you?" she whispered helplessly. "Your interpreter, Highness," returned Mara in Babylonian, smiling more sympathetically this time, and dropping briefly to one knee. Anani's relief at hearing a familiar tongue spoken by one of these arrogant Egyptians was pathetic. She gave a great sigh of pleasure and turned excitedly to the dozen gaudily clad and perspiring serving women who huddled behind her. "It is an interpreter. She speaks Babylonian," she cried, as if they could not hear for themselves, and at that all the plump faces lighted up, and those who understood Babylonian turned to explain the joyful news to those who spoke only their local dialects, and for a while nothing at all could be heard except their excited jabbering. At last, though, Anani gestured them to silence and turned eagerly to Mara. "Oh, please," she begged, "find out from that man there who commands the ship if we may leave this place soon and row on to Thebes. So long have we been on this river, so many, many tiresome days, and no one explains anything. And a week now we have been in the temple yonder, while the priests mumble strange things over us and make us wash and wash and wash until we are like to drown. What is it all for? Are we never to leave off traveling and washing?" "Patience, my princess," soothed Mara, stifling a grin. "I can answer your questions without talking to Sanquen." Any foreigner journeying to Pharaoh's palace must undergo the ceremonies of purification. But it is over now. We leave immediately, and before another night and day we will moor in Thebes. Ah, thanks be to the beautiful Ishtar, thanks to Baal and in his temple. Come, let us go in out of the sun. I am like to die of heat. Still chattering like a congregation of peahens, oh, okay, of peahens, the women swarmed inside and, safe now from masculine eyes, began to shed their thick shawls and scarves and cloaks, and to fling themselves panting on couches. I shall never grow used to this climate, groaned the princess, running her hand through her sweat-dampened hair. And I'm told that it's far hotter in the season of flood. How do you live under such a sun? We dress for it, Mara pointed out in amusement. We too would smother and gasp for air in those heavy woolens. We wear wool only at night when the air is cold. You will find yourself more comfortable, my princess, when you possess an Egyptian wardrobe. Inanni glanced at Mara's bare shoulders and sheer, narrow garment and blushed crimson. Oh, I could never wear those things, she gasped. Shocking! My brothers told me this was a dangerous and wicked land, for all that the temples are paved with silver. Mara laughed outright at this. We are not wicked, only sensible. You may grow wise too after a summer spent on the Nile. She refrained from adding that it would also be well for Inanni and her women to grow thinner, both for coolness and fashion's sake. The vision of these fat Syrians in the narrow Egyptian sheaths filled her with mirth. Almost at once they could hear Sanquen's bellowed orders and the bustle of casting off. In a short time the barge was maneuvered through the funeral traffic in the harbor, and as they picked up speed on the open river, the cool north breeze began to drift through the pavilion. Most of the Syrians went gratefully to sleep, but for some time Inanni kept Mara busy with questions about Egypt and the king and the golden palace for which they were headed. Mara gave what answers she knew and glibly invented the others. But finally the princess too dropped into uneasy slumber, and Mara rose and tiptoed out to the open deck. The fragrance of roasted meat from the attendant kitchen boat had warned her that noonday was near. Standing at the prow, shading her eyes against Ra's dazzling beams, she soon located the Silver Beetle standing off the west bank. As she watched, the broad sail rose rib by rib like a gigantic fin, and the vessel moved into the middle of the stream. The closer it came, the faster Mara's heart pounded. She searched its trim decks, so familiar to her, and yet somehow different and strange because she stood apart from them now. She spotted Nakonk bellowing some order up into the rigging, and could almost feel the tug in her own body as the wind filled the sail. And at last she saw Sheftu, a still sun-flooded figure with his face in shadow, leaning with that deceptive laziness near the great sweep at the stern. He gave no sign, nor did she, though for a moment they could almost have clasped hands over the narrow stretch of green water between them. Then, slowly, the distance widened as the Beetle gathered speed and drew ahead of the more ponderous barge. Not until the sail grew small in the distance did Mara turn back to the shadowy pavilion, feeling lonely and unreasonably depressed. Soon she would walk the gleaming pavements of the golden house, Pharaoh's palace, but soon she also must face her second meeting with that new master. The war hawk is coming. It meant nothing to her, but no doubt it would to the granite-jawed one. O gods of Egypt, what a little time Sheftu had to live. Part 3, The Palace. Chapter 7, Royal Summons. Kim? Daniel? Daniel's asleep. Just kidding, there's no way he's asleep. Daniel? Nope, he's faking. All right, JJ? also faking, I think, but I'm going to go check on both of them. So I will be right back. Daniel? All right, chapter 7. I think JJ is about 90% out, it seems, but we'll see. Anyway, all right. Part 3, the palace. Chapter 7, royal summons. The first word is the. Excuse me. The Princess Inanni was in a sad state. After an entire Egyptian week, 10 days, in the Golden House, she was still unable to conquer the awe and terror her new home inspired in her. She awoke, calling nervously for Mara at the entrance of the first long-eyed Egyptian servant in the morning, and each evening had to be coaxed into the great golden beast-headed couch that was her bed. The creature's pink ivory tongue and gleaming teeth terrified her. She could not get comfortable on the exquisitely carved ebony headrest, which was so much cooler than her hot Syrian pillow. And in between waking and sleeping, there were further ordeals. The cold bath twice daily, senseless torture which Egyptians accepted as a matter of course, the vigorous massaging afterward, the forcing of combs through her tangled hip-length hair, her vain attempts to master the arts of eating with a spoon instead of her fingers. On top of all this, she had not yet so much as laid eyes on the queen or on the young king she had traveled so far to marry. Her pride was outraged. She was in tears half a dozen times a day at this cavalier treatment. Yet the magnificence of the palace so overawed her that she hardly dared touch the furnishings of her own apartments. Mara really felt sorry for her. She herself was drinking in the luxury as parched ground drinks the waters of the Nile. As Anani's closest companion, for the princess clung to her desperately as the one person who could and would explain away some of the countless bewilderments, she had actually been given a slave of her own to bathe and dress her. She dined magnificently off roasted waterfowl and incredible pastries. She had shady gardens to walk in and fresh flowers for her hair and neck as many times a day as she desired. True, she still kicked off those bothersome sandals whenever she had a chance. Sorry, I lost my place. And had to keep a sharp watch over her tongue lest it slip into the vocabulary of the streets. One highly colored phrase would give her away instantly to the palace servants, most of whom were free-born and as far above her in station as she pretended to be above them. Secretly, she was a little in awe of them. It took self-control not to show it. It took gall to send them fetching and carrying as if she were some great lady. But gall Mara had in plenty, and Inani's helpless confusion was not hers. She had been a slave in luxurious houses, as Inani had not. Only the scale of this grandeur and her own changed role were new to her. Also, she was a natural mimic, blessed with a sense of humor and a cool nerve which Inani certainly was not, and her precarious life had made her adaptable as a chameleon. How often had she stood ready with comb or fresh linen beside Zasha's lady's dressing table. Now she was the one who snapped her fingers for others to obey, and she had not forgotten a single haughty gesture. She took mischievous delight in using them all. Moreover, she had not yet caught a glimpse of her new master, or of Sheftu either. Therefore, nothing whatever was required of her save luxurious lounging. Life was so perfect, it was in danger of becoming monotonous. On the 11th morning after their arrival, she was awakened, as usual, by Anani's frightened call. Smiling though through her yawn, Mara slipped from her couch and hurried into the adjoining room. "Come now, my princess," she soothed. "It is only the maidservant to bring thy fruit and greet the day with thee. Cease thy cowering, or she will laugh about thee in the servants' hall." Anani reluctantly loosed her grasp on the bedclothes and sat up, still eyeing the maid with distrust. She looked sidewise at me, down her nose, as if she were the queen herself, she complained. Nonsense. Her father was likely a stone-cutter, or at best a groom in the royal stables. What would thy brothers say? Mara turned to the servant, who had set down her bowl of fruit and waited now for dismissal. It was true that her painted eyes held an insolent gleam. An Egyptian felt superior to a barbarian. "Why are your hands at your sides?" inquired Mara coldly. The servant's eyes met hers and lost their mockery. Hastily, her right hand went to her left shoulder. "Better. It is possible I will not mention your miserable name to Hatshepsut the Glorious, provided you show proper deference to your princess after this." "Excellency, live forever!" gasped the girl, turning white. "You would not. I never meant." "Dismissed!" Mara cut her off. The servant prostrated herself and then fled. Mara was inwardly convulsed. "Oh, marvelously done," she thought. "Did ever a slave so beautifully subdue a free maid? How she would rage if she knew who it was that plays the great lady." She turned back to find Inanni regarding her with both gratitude and admiration. "Mara, what did you say to her?" "Only that you are the Princess Inanni and must be treated so. Do not think of her. She is as a beetle under your sandal. Come, perfume your mouth with the figs and grapes she has brought you. It will soon be time for the bath." Inanni's face fell dismally at the prospect, but she climbed down from her high couch, being careful to stay well away from the gleaming teeth of the beasts who supported it. A few minutes later she was hungrily eating a fig and mourning the skimpiness of Egyptian breakfasts. "Why, in my homeland we have bread and good meat. Here you do not even dignify it by the name of breakfast, but call it the perfuming of the mouth." "We do not think of it as a meal," said Mara, smiling. "Lift up your head, Rose of Canaan. Perhaps your summons from Pharaoh will come today." "It should have come before. Have they forgotten they sent for me?" "Nay, of course not. No doubt her Majesty is allowing you time to recover from your journey. Now do not brood about it. We will do something different this morning. My little slave tells me there are gardens we have not yet visited, also that there is a pavilion on the roof from which—" She stopped. The tapestry curtaining the doorway into her own bedchamber had stirred noticeably, and there was no draught. "From which one can see the entire city," she finished evenly. She put down a bunch of grapes untasted. "Meanwhile, with your highness's leave, I will retire to bathe and dress." Summoning two of the Syrian women to divert the princess, she walked to the curtained doorway and, with a sudden motion, pushed aside the hangings. The room was as empty as when she had left it. She stepped inside, letting the tapestry fall behind her. The bedclothes were still in a snarl on the lion-legged couch. The chest and littered dressing table stood undisturbed against the wall, bright with painted golden butterflies. The doors to both bath chamber and hall were closed and blank. Yet those hangings had moved. She flung off her night robe, wondering why it had not occurred to her before that a spy might have been set to keep a watch on her. Sheftu had openly admitted that he trusted her no farther than tomorrow, and as for that stony-eyed master of hers, she frowned, realized that she had been rapidly putting on her own clothes, asked, was she trying to reveal herself for what she was? Just as rapidly she stripped the garments off, put on her nightrobe again, and clapped her hands for her slave. The little brown maiden flung open the hall door so promptly that Mara gave her a sharp look. Was she the spy then? No, surely not. The child was no more than 12 years old, with a face as innocent as a flower. Mara pitied her suddenly, remembering how it felt at 12 to stand motionless for hours in some corridor, waiting for the clap of hands. Hast been impatient, little Nessie? Go then, make ready my bath. We'll soon be done here. When the girl had disappeared into the bath chamber, Mara glanced around once more, uneasily searching for some clue to her uninvited visitor. On a sudden thought, she went to the little carved chest and raised its lid. At first, she saw nothing amiss. Then she dropped to her knees, lifting with cautious fingers a fold of the topmost garment. Under it lay a common honey cake, the sort sold in the streets of Memphis by the baker's boys. She picked it up, frowning. It had not been there before, of that she was certain. She turned it over, scanned it top and bottom, and finally broke it open. There, in its flaky middle, was a scrap of papyrus. In a trice, she was reading the tiny hieroglyphs. A princess enjoys the lotus garden in the cool of the evening. That was all it said. Thoughtfully, Mara tore it into a dozen pieces, and after some hesitation, dropped the scraps into a tall alabaster vase that stood in one corner. Even if they were pieced together, they would seem but a fragment from some scribe's copybook. She ate the honey cake, dusted the crumbs from her fingers, and went to take her bath. Very cleverly done, she thought, as she lay on the rubbing table enjoying the ministrations of the capable little Nessie. So there was no spy, only a summons to walk this evening with the Princess Inani in one of the palace gardens, one with a lotus pool. Perhaps she could locate it from that roof pavilion Nessie had mentioned, but which master had sent the summons? It would be like Sheftu to identify himself with the honey cake. He had seen her stealing cakes that day in Memphis. Still, so had the stone-faced one. She remembered his acid remark. Remember, I am no stupid baker's apprentice. Should the chain and you disappear somehow between here and the wharfs, it would be regrettable. Well, she had not made off with his golden chain, nor had she deceived him in any way. On the contrary, he would have good reason to be pleased with her when they met again. There was no need to be afraid of him, none at all. She had the information he wanted, more than he'd ever hoped to get. Mara found she was no longer enjoying her massage. Rising abruptly, she led the way back to the bedroom. Should it be not Sheftu but her master awaiting her in the lotus garden tonight? Her stay at the palace would be over almost before it began, and that would be regrettable too, especially for Sheftu. One mention of the cooling north breeze to be found on the roof was enough to rouse Inani's enthusiasm for a visit there. At mid-morning, she and Mara, accompanied only by little Nessie, made their way through a maze of halls, up an outside stairway, and out onto a terraced loggia. It was cool and windy, strewn with soft couches, and shaded by a great canopy set on beribboned columns. Here and there rose wide-mouthed air scoops which sent the breeze down into the sleeping chambers below. Mara walked to the balustrade and leaned forward upon her elbows. From here, 2 stories up, one had a wide view of the sunlit labyrinth of courtyards, passages, groves, and gardens enclosed by the palace walls. Her strolls with Inani had showed her only a fraction of them. Look, my princess, she exclaimed, your new home. Inani looked, trembled, and moved uneasily away. Mara watched her for a moment, half pitying, half contemptuous, then turned back to the balustrade. Which garden? There were so many. She made a slow circuit of the roof, almost dismayed at the expanse of the palace grounds and their complexity. Save for the huge guard room, the entire ground floor of the Golden House was devoted to workshops, kitchens, and storerooms. Among and beyond these were walled gardens in bewildering profusion, and every one of them had its lotus pool. But as she rounded the corner to the north side, she saw what she wanted. It was the largest garden of all, with a pool the very shape of a lotus bud, almost overflowing with blue lilies. and more of them painted along its rim. Satisfied, she was about to turn away when she chanced to raise her eyes beyond the walls. "Ay, blessed Osiris," she breathed. "Highness, come to this side if you would see Thebes. There it lies." Inanni joined her at the balustrade, and together they looked out over the vast spread of the city. The palace stood near the Nile's west bank, within view of the queen's magnificent temple, which stood low, colonnaded, and gleaming white in the dazzling sunlight, far back against the golden cliffs. Mara could see the green incense terraces Nikonk had helped bring into being. From them the desert descended in two broad benches to the level of the valley, then the necropolis, a belt of low, dust-colored buildings housing the embalmers, coffin-makers, stone-cutters, glass-blowers, weavers, and all other craftsmen whose work was devoted to the tombs, stretched on to join the emerald fields of the flower growers, in which in turn extended to the river. The river divided the city like a silver blade and was dotted with every size and shape of vessel. Behind the slow-moving sails rose the high east bank and Thebes proper, a maze of white buildings flooded with sun from whose flag shafts and massive temple pylons red and white banners waved like beckoning fingers. Every surface sparkled with color and the glint of gold. Roofs stretched eastward under the brilliant blue sky as far as the eye could reach. Mara propped her chin on her hands, drinking it all in. A marvelous city, grander than Memphis, grayer than Abydos, and even wickeder, it was said, than Bubastis on the lower Nile. It filled her with excitement. Around the palace itself, a small town had grown up, composed largely of the white-walled villas of Egypt's great nobles and a few of the finest craftsmen and goldsmith studios. Mara stared at the chariots flashing along the stone-paved streets, at the palms thrusting up like plumes from invisible pleasure gardens, and wondered if one of those grand houses belonged to Lord Sheftu. Ay, what a life they lead, those great ones! Think, my princess, you are one of them now, and live in the center of the world. Is it not a glorious city you have come to after all your journeying?" "I hate it," whispered Inanni. Startled, Mara swung around. Inanni was gripping the balustrade, her plump face white with misery, her eyes swerving away from Mara's astonished ones, and though she were frightened to have spoken her mind for once, but she went on recklessly, "It's too big and too full of buildings. In my homeland, there are plains and green pastures, and the tents of the shepherds shine in the sun, and the flocks graze all about. It is not like this in any way. All speak my language there, but here all are strangers to me, and know not my ways, and I know not theirs." "What does that matter? Think you are to be the bride of royalty, of a prince of Egypt? Think you are to be the bride of royalty of a prince of Egypt. The king has not sent for me." "But he will." Mara could not help laughing a little. Meanwhile, have you not all you could desire, slaves and comforts, and a home in the golden house itself? Take heart. It is not possible you could be homesick. "Is it not?" Inanni turned, gathering the folds of her heavy shawl, and made an effort to smile. She had never looked gawkier or more defenseless, but suddenly she was not funny at all. "I suppose it is not. You have been good to me, Mara, and speak to me in my own tongue, and explain things, and try to teach me to be Egyptian. But I fear I am no credit to you. I cannot help longing for the plains of Syria and the voices of my brothers." She broke off, tears welling into her eyes, then moved abruptly to the other side of the pavilion. Mara turned away too, no longer amused at a ridiculous barbarian, but sorry for a homesick maid with all her heart. Suddenly, above the voices of the doves in the palace eaves and the faint, melodious creaking of water wheels in the fields, there came a new sound, far, high, piercing. Mara looked up. There above her, in the radiant vault of the sky, a great bird soared. Horus, the falcon, the god, the symbol of royalty. As she watched, it closed its powerful wings and dropped like a plummet upon a desert lark just spiraling upward from the meadows. The lark's melody was choked off in mid-trill. Again, the great wings beat, and the falcon wheeled off toward Libya. Its triumphant scream, 7 notes on a descending scale, trailed after it like a banner. Mara was still breathless from the beauty and the cruelty of its attack, when an exclamation from Inanni made her whirl around. A chamberlain had emerged from the door to the stairway. He advanced to Inanni with measured tread and bowed stiffly. Princess, rejoice, the glorious one, daughter of Ra Most High, Horus of gold and great god of the land of the double kingdom, commands your presence. Mara? Quavered the princess, taking an uncertain step backward. But Mara was already hurrying to her side. Quick, Highness, send little Nessie to summon your women. We must go down at once. It is the audience with the queen. Chapter 8 is called Her Majesty the Pharaoh. And the first word is A. And this chapter is only 8 pages. I thought it was 6. We're already at 51. Who wants to keep going? JJ, are you awake? They said go, go, go. Waiting for Becca to say, Kimmy? Are you up for another chapter, though? All right, let's see what Becca says. If we want to meet the Pharaoh. Still waiting for Rebecca. All right, let's just keep going. Because I got 3 over here that said keep going. So we'll just keep going. That's going to make this a little long, but we'll survive. All right. Chapter 8, Her Majesty, Rebecca said sure. Her Majesty the Pharaoh. A is the first word. A sudden hush fell upon the crowd in the huge colonnaded guard room, and all heads turned in one direction. Courtiers, priests, glittering ladies, and grouchy ambassadors fell back silently to make room for the procession which had entered from the courtyard at the far end of the hall. The chamberlain, tapping his long, beribboned wand, paced first. Inanni followed him, with Mara close by her side, and the 12 Syrians at her heels. Slowly they moved down the long aisle of watching faces, past all the supercilious painted eyes and quirking lips, past the arched brows, the murmurs behind hands, the disdainful shrugs, down the whole shining length of the room. It was the worst ordeal Inanni had had to face, and this one she met like a princess. Mara, close beside her, could feel the plump arm quaking under its gaudy, thick draperies. But Inanni held her chin high and kept her eyes unwaveringly on the back of the chamberlain's neck. Perhaps she was thinking of her brothers. There was an antechamber to pass through before they stood in front of the tall bronze doors. Here the chamberlain faced them and rattled off a list of instructions concerning court etiquette, of which Mara translated only the least confusing. Then, at last, the doors swung open, the chamberlain stepped forward and flung himself on his face, intoning, "Behold, the majesty of the Black Land, Horus of gold, enduring of kingship, splendid of diadems, ruler of Lower and Upper Egypt, enduring of form is Ra, Mekeri Hatepchut, may the god live forever." Mara, suddenly trembling from head to foot, advanced beside Inanni until they stood inside the room. There, across a stretch of gleaming pavement, stood a raised dais framed by two exquisitely painted columns. Upon the dais rested a great throne fashioned entirely of shimmering electrum, and on the throne sat a woman so coldly beautiful that it took away the breath to gaze on her. Electrum, by the way, is it's like silver and gold that are mixed together. It's naturally occurring, but it's also forged. So anyway, that's what electrum is, and it's very valuable, and the Egyptians were just enamored with it. So that's what electrum is. Just like lapis lazuli, they were also enamored with electrum. She sat stiffly, that's the Pharaoh, her glittering dark eyes fixed, her hands holding emblems shining with gold and enamel, fluted linen, fine as a cobweb, enveloped her like a mist. She was weighted with jewels. Upon her flawlessly modeled chin was tied the narrow ceremonial beard denoting kingship, and upon her head rested the heavy red and white double crown of the two kingdoms, with the golden cobra curving out over her brow. Woman or not, there sat the awesome Majesty of Egypt, the sun god incarnate. The entire procession fell to its knees. 14 foreheads, Mara's among them, touched the cold tiles of the floor. Lift up your head, princess of Syria, said Hatshepsut. You may approach my majesty. Her voice was high and metallic. Mara felt the glittering eyes upon her even before she raised her own with an effort to meet them. Pharaoh had not relaxed her godlike rigidity, but she had turned her head, and her scrutiny was so thorough, so impersonal, that it made Mara feel like a bird on a spit. You may speak, interpreter, added the queen impatiently. Mara tried and failed. In a panic, she swallowed, tried again, and this time managed to inform Inanni that she was to rise and walk forward. What shall I say, Mara? Came the prince's frightened whisper as she reluctantly obeyed. Say it for me, please. May Hatshepsut the glorious endure forever, stammered Mara. The Princess Inanni presents her respects to your radiance. The queen permitted herself a cold, gracious smile. Then, to Mara's infinite relief, the probing eyes were withdrawn from her, and Hatshepsut turned her entire attention to Inanni. There followed conventional questions as to her comfort, congratulations on the successful voyage, assurances that she need only speak to have anything she desired. Mara was breathing more easily now. The nervous sweat had dried on the palms of her hands, and she had regained the use of her tongue. As she translated the stilted phrases, she began to be aware of other people in the room. They were standing all about the walls, motionless as shadows, but here and there the twinkle of gold as a head turned, or the flash of jewels from a lifted hand gave proof that they were people and not painted images. And have you had audience with His Highness, your bridegroom? Inquired Hatshepsut. Scarcely waiting for Inanni's almost inaudible reply, she spoke with a malicious smile to someone standing to her right and slightly behind her on the dais itself. What think you, Count Senmut? Is she not all we have expected, and even more? So that is Count Setmut, thought Mara. Curiously and with awe she studied the most powerful figure in Egypt, a spare, big-shouldered man wearing a twist of amulets about his throat. The queen seemed ageless, but Senmut's darkly handsome face mirrored all the struggle and scheming of her 18 years upon the throne. His smile, faint though it was, carved harsh furrows from his flaring nostrils to the corners of his mouth. His eyes were rapacious. He bent to murmur something to the queen, and she laughed. Aye, it will be a sight. A pity she will not enjoy it. Interpreter, Inform the princess that she may expect to meet her bridegroom very soon." As Mara obeyed, Hatshepsut lifted a slim hand loaded with rings and beckoned lazily to someone who stood half hidden in the shadows beside the throne. Next instant, every word of Babylonian she knew fled from Mara's mind. It was Sheftu who stepped forward with his leopard's grace, but a far, far different Sheftu from the man who had lounged beside her while the sails slapped and the sun sparkled on the river. This one wore royal linen as casually as the other had worn his simple Sheftu. His simple Shenty. Sheftu's the person. His dark features were arrogant against a headcloth of woven gold. There was gold on his ankles, his arms, and his long sinewy fingers, and a blaze of emeralds at his throat. Here was a great noble she had tried and failed to picture, a lord of creation, as remote from her as Pharaoh herself. Only the amulet on his left wrist was unchanged, and its curiously knotted flax threads and familiar beads gave her a feeling akin to homesickness, for he who wore it seemed a stranger. Then, for just an instant, his eyes met hers, and a delicious warmth stole over her. I was wrong, she thought. This is the same who once held me in his arms, though he would not kiss me. The very same, by the beard of Ptah, whose grand rich life I hold in the palm of my gutter-snipe's hand this minute. "Send word to Thutmose today," Hatshepsut was murmuring, "that he must receive this Syrian at once. You yourself, Lord Sheftu, arrange for the marriage as soon as may be, and we will have done with her. How stupid and vulgar she is in her tasteless wrappings. A fit consort for my surly half-brother, think you not? How I would like to see that meeting. He will grow red in the face and hurl vases and ornaments to the floor and pace up and down in his endless pacing, as he always does." Hatshepsut smiled. "Nevertheless, he will obey me, as he always does." If her venom enraged Sheftu, he gave no hint of it. His expression was as smoothly controlled as his bow. No more than an inclination of the head was required for his exalted rank, and he bent not a hair lower. "Pharaoh's name is glorious," he remarked amiably, without specifying, Mara noticed, whether it was Hatshepsut or Thutmose to whom he gave the title. "All shall be as Pharaoh desires." "You are ever trustworthy, Lord Sheftu." Hatshepsut smiled on him, and he smiled winsomely back. "And now, my lord, if you will provide our fat princess with refreshment." He made a careless gesture. At once lackeys bearing sweetmeats and garlanded jars of wine converged on Inanni, then passed through the ranks of the courtiers, who obediently came to life, clinking their wine cups with the rigidly correct, stilted movements which made court etiquette a sort of elegant ballet. Sheftu turned away and walked, almost sauntered, back to his place, arrogant and assured. Not for him the puppet-like movements of these lesser beings. Mara, still on her knees behind the princess, watched him and admired his daring. Suddenly her eyes riveted on a half-shadowed figure just beyond him. For the second time she felt the shock of a familiar face, but this time the sensation was distinctly unpleasant, for there, grim-faced as the devourer himself, stood her mysterious new master. For a moment the man's cold visage held her fascinated. Did he ever change expression? Just so he had looked when he offered her riches and danger back in Memphis. Just so he would still look while he watched the slow death of that gold-decked young renegade beside him. How would they kill Sheftu once they knew? He could not hope for the mercy of the strangler, not while Hatshepsut and her wily architect ruled the Black Land. He would more likely meet the torturer's stake. Or perhaps, Mara had a feeling this would please Count Senmut, perhaps they would bow to Sheftu's ultimate destiny and feed him to the crocodiles, those long, sinister, brown-green shapes with their pale mouths wide open, waiting. Just one word from her. I cannot do it, was her first thought. But her second was, you can do it, since you must. But was there any need for haste? The thought calmed her. It would be pleasant to stay at the Golden House a little longer, she told herself. I would not speak quite yet. Later, so it be, but not yet. At that, a new fear struck her. If she delayed, who knew how the cat might jump? It was possible Hatshepsut had met her match in this clever Sheftu. Given a little time, he might bring his plans to maturity and snatch that gleaming throne and give it to the king. Then what would happen to the queen's favorites and their gold and the dreams of the Princess Inani's interpreter? Mara knew only too well her only sure safety lay in serving her master. But as she looked from him to the indolently lounging Lord Sheftu, it was hard to choose. The solution that sprang into her mind next instant was so simple, so obvious, that she all but laughed aloud. She would not choose. Why make a choice between these two when each thought her his ally, his bonded slave? Why not play both ends against the middle, serve both, meanwhile serving only herself? Then, when the cat jumped, she would jump with it. The opportunities that opened for one who knew how to use her wits! She started at the sound of the queen's voice. Dismiss the lackeys, Count Senmut. I think this Syrian does not like our wine. The servants withdrew, and Hatshepsut spoke again, this time to Mara. Bid the princess farewell. May the gods of Egypt and Syria go with her, and offer her my majesty's felicitations on her coming marriage, which will surely be a joyous one. The voice dripped mockery, and the beautiful lips twisted in a smile remarkably like the one carving furrows on the dark countenance of Count Senmut behind her. Mara felt her optimism drain away in spite of all she could do, and the sight of the white mask which was Inani's face lowered her spirits still further. Friendless, homesick, unfortunate princess. Small wonder she had been unable to swallow the wine. Inani managed to stammer out her thanks and farewells, and Mara translated with an effort. Hatshepsut nodded, and her smile grew broader. She began to laugh deep in her throat. The sound grew in volume until the chamber was filled with it. Mara found herself remembering the scream of Horus, the royal falcon, as he plummeted down from the sky that morning to seize the lark. Her flesh was creeping as she rose from her knees at last to back slowly toward the door beside the pallid Inani. For the queen, still laughing, had raised her gold and enameled scepter. The audience was over. That's the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9 is called Lion in a Snare. The first word is Inanis. I'm not sure what JJ just said, but... Oh, he thinks that this might be a link to Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, which, interestingly enough, these two came out about the same time. I'll come up with an exact date for Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. This one is 1953. Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is sometime in the 50s, so that is obviously look-upable. But I think I'm not sure if Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe came out before this book or not. But that is definitely where we're going to end it today. I would like to remind Rebecca and Kimberly especially because they seem to be my most avid drawers in the group, that we do have a drawing contest going on. Who can draw the best picture, or who can draw a picture, it doesn't have to be the best. We'll display all the pictures if we get them, of Mara, or if you don't want to draw Mara, you can draw some other Egyptian picture, and we will use that. We will try. Okay, JJ, I'm talking. We will try to anytime there's a picture, we'll put them in the as a post on the Facebook page so that everybody can see them and you can make comments on them and that kind of thing. So I hope everybody's enjoying the story. I hope everybody's enjoying Galatians, which is a great book written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Galatia. And otherwise, I don't have anything else further. So I bid you adieu, and you have a good night, and we will see you tomorrow. And that is another story. God bless you. Have a good night.